In the film The Flowers of War, we start in the middle of the raping of Nanking, which took place in 1937. The film shows how a group of young convent girls were able to escape the tragedies taking place in Nanking with the help of flowers from the red light district known as the Women of the Jinhua River, and an American Westerner, John Miller. In the film, we're shown of the selfishness that's depicted from Americans during the 1930s. Our American Westerner John is a mortician who was called to prepare the body of a late priest, but when he learns that there's no longer a body for him to prepare, instead of simply sympathizing with the children who are now all alone, his initial response was, "I still need to be paid, and for what I went through getting here, I should raise the price." We then see George, a young convent boy, ask John for his help to fix an old truck that they have in the yard in order for the children to leave Nanking. John's response is again asking for money, saying that he will not do any of this for free. We see how John searches throughout the church for money, and when he comes across the room of the late priest, he then jokes about how he'll stay at the church instead of going to the refuge, because he sees how the room has plenty of luxuries that he will not likely get at the refuge. This is a reminder of how Americans have a very individualistic mindset and only care for their own well-being. We are then introduced to the flowers, the women of the Jinhua River. The women have made their way to the convent because one of their ladies had serviced a man the previous night who promised shelter and safety from the Japanese to all of the women at the church. This reinstates that women in Asian culture must rely on men in order to acquire any type of safety or well-being. However, because these women are flowers, they know how to be resilient and how to acquire things of their own by seducing men with their charisma and not always being submissive. We see the young convent girls and George tending to one another and not interacting much with the flowers. This is because flowers are known to be women who only care for themselves and their own kind and their own well-being, much like the Americans. The flowers immediately take over the cellar and turn the once musty old cellar into a livable room for all the women, which smells of rouge and perfume. The small frame that we're given to see inside the cellar once the women have redecorated gives us some insight of how things were viewed back at their brothel. The setting of the rooms were combined and recreated their home and business in order to bring comfort and intimacy that they were very accustomed to before all of the chaos. The leader of the flowers, Yumo, shows off her charisma to our American Westerner John by seducing him in order to be invited to his room privately, where she tries to negotiate a plan of him helping the ladies leave from Nanking. She shows her dominance by not following John to his bed for the service that he was going to pay for, and instead she leaves his room telling him to think about the offer, because if he follows through, then he will be repaid in ways that he could never imagine by not only her, but all the women. This shows the shift in dominance that usually is fulfilled by the male role that we see in the majority of Asian culture. As the film goes on, we see the young girls and the flowers quarrel over the bathroom, and the fight quickly stops when a bullet comes flying through the window and strikes one of the young girls. This scene quickly changes from frustration to immediate fear, and both groups agree quickly on hiding in the cellar where the flowers had been staying. We see the women gather into the cellar, and Yumo stops one of the ladies from closing the door, insisting they wait for the girls. This is where we see a shift in feelings start to change, as before the women only cared for their own safety and well-being. Now they are beginning to sympathize for the young girls. One of the main girls, Shu, and the other girls quickly hurry towards the cellar, but they're stopped by a Japanese soldier spotting them. In this moment, we see the alliance between the flowers and the young girls solidify, and bravery come through the girls because Shu leads them upstairs away from the cellar so that George and the flowers are able to hide and remain safe. During the infiltration from the Japanese, we see John trying to hide from the soldiers until he hears the girls crying out for help. The emphasis of the background noises and the choice of music shows just how climactical his change from caring only of his own safety then shifts towards the girl's safety, because this reminds him of his late daughter and how he would have done anything to protect her. While his attempt to protect the girls is very brave, this doesn't stop the Japanese from making yet another convent girl a victim. After the traumatic experience, we learn of a softer side that John had been hiding from the kids and the flowers. This more vulnerable side that he shows helps us see just how much the Japanese hurt the rest of China. Since we don't see many other people, his feelings can be taken as a symbol of the people of China hurting from these horrible actions. And although the girls are not his own children, his heart aches for them knowing that they are being trapped in the church and that they have no way of getting out on their own. This can also be taken as a symbol of people outside of Nanking hurting and feeling horrible for the fact that they have no way of helping the ones trapped within the city during the hard times that they're enduring from the Japanese soldier. When the girls are told they must attend a Japanese party to sing for the soldiers in their triumph at occupying Nanking, they almost accept defeat. When Shu and the girls are climbing at the top of the bell tower to attempt to end the misery, this is a huge symbolism of how people of China's faith was dwindling during the Sino-Japanese War. When the flowers and John come up with a solution of how to save the girls from going to the Japanese military party, this can also be viewed as when the last troops strategized for one last possibility to overcome the Japanese. Some of the last scenes that we see of the women changing themselves to appear younger to take the places of the girls is very intimate. These scenes are intimate because they emphasize youthfulness and innocence. And earlier in the film, we learned of how Yumo had her innocence taken from her while she was a convent girl herself at just the age of 13. Seeing John change the women's physical appearances to look as they did when they were younger and innocent is a very powerful scene. The emphasis on youth and innocence is of great importance, especially since the film covers one of the most horrible times in history for China, when at least 20,000 women and girls of all ages were raped from Japanese soldiers and killed in the process. Seeing the flowers gather up the courage to try and undermine the soldiers is very powerful because, as we've said before, in Asian culture, women are usually very submissive to men, but here they are claiming dominance. To try and outsmart these men, taking away the thing that they've tried so hard to acquire, takes a lot of courage and is not something common to come from women, especially during the 1930s. We also have George begging John to make him appear as one of the convent girls because they need a total of 13 students and only have 12 flowers. George's actions can be seen as being very brave and noble. He lives up to the male role he's supposed to fulfill given that he is a male and his culture sees men as being very dominant and tough. George portraying himself to the Japanese as a female is a great reference of a soldier sacrificing themselves in war in an attempt to save others. The final scenes of the film show the flowers and George dressed as the convent girls, and John is sending them away to the Japanese soldiers. This scene can also be viewed as the last Chinese troops being sent out for one last attempt to counter the Japanese attacks in order for other bystanders to be given an opportunity to flee the city. Hence, the bystanders in the film being the girls hiding in the cellar. We see John driving away in the old truck with the girls hidden in the bed by boxes as a disguise to sneak past the Japanese at the checkpoint. After passing the checkpoint, we are shown a close-up of John with tears in his eyes, knowing that his guilt is heavy for not having been able to save George and the flowers as well. His guilt may also represent the guilt of a general or colonel that sent his last men to try and defend the little people that were left, knowing that he wished he could have helped more. Our final scene is a replay of the flowers when they first arrived at the church. This can also be interpreted as representation of tribute to the soldiers that fought in the final battle at Nanking.